I'm Linda Woodhead. I'm Professor of Sociology of Religion at Lancaster University. We are going to be looking at the absolutely crucial topic of what the Church of England's vision is. What's the point of it? Why should people, particularly the next generation, want to come to the Church of England? Just to set us off, I've been doing a lot of big surveys, that's part of my job as a sociologist, of general opinion. And preparing for this, it was very interesting to look at a question I deliberately asked right across the board: general population, Anglican laity and clergy. And the question was for this debate. The question was about, if you think the Church of England has something positive to offer society still, what do you think that is? The really fascinating thing that comes out from that research is that the laity have a completely different answer from the clergy. The laity say the things that matter, they think, that the Church of England has to offer are that it's integral to English culture, that it's part of our heritage, and something about values and its ethical voice. Okay? That's what lay Anglicans, self-identified Church of England members say. The clergy completely disagree. They don't count those reasons at all in the top lists of theirs. For them, the three things that matter most are that the Church of England is at the heart of local communities, that it brings people closer to God, and that it offers support for the needy. Who's right? Or is there some other vision? And what's the one the Church of England should cluster around as it moves forward in difficult times? Martyn Percy is Dean of Christ Church and has co-organised this particular series with me. He's going to be our chair.
Well, let me begin by just very briefly introducing Professor Diarmaid MacCulloch, who's Professor of the History of the Church at the University of Oxford, an award-winning author, a Knight of the Realm, and Diarmaid, it's over to you. Thank you very much for being here.
The future of the Church of England is bound up with its credibility in the eyes of the public. It is an established church, and if it is perceived by the bulk of the population of this country as taking sides with evil rather than good, then it has forfeited its continuing right to established status. And thanks to the cowardice and timidity of its episcopal leadership, it is in danger of doing just that. One of the greatest evils of our time is the wave of homophobia sweeping certain parts of Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Russian Empire. Gay people are being attacked, imprisoned, or killed because of their sexuality. And with the shining exception of the Anglican Church in South Africa, African Anglican bishops have been on the side of the persecutors and not of the persecuted. And what do we hear from our episcopate? Nothing. Instead, we see them soft-pedalling on the homophobic alliance of Anglican leaders, which calls itself GAFCON. We see moves to conciliate the homophobic, self-styled Anglican Church of North America. English Anglicans need to get over a cultural cringe about the colonial past. We are part of a worldwide Anglican family, as Archbishop Welby is fond of reminding us. Now it is our duty of atonement for past British colonial mistakes to do what family members should do, to tell West and East African Anglicans to become Christian adults, to put away a shoddy, superficial theology which has led them into paths of hatred and homophobic violence. Archbishops Welby and Sentamu, now let us hear your prophetic voice.
Thank you very much. Do save up your questions as we go along. Our second speaker this evening is Vicky Beeching, who is a theologian and writer and broadcaster. And if you tune into Sky News from time to time, you can often catch her writing, and she's also, of course, a prolific blogger and tweeter as well.
The first thing I think we need in looking to the future of the Church of England is a sense of urgency, a wake-up call. And I don't say that to discredit the Church of England. I say it because I love the Church. But we are in decline. The statistics do prove it. And the first step to realising how to get well is to be honest about the condition you're in, isn't it? So out of love for the Church, I say tonight, we need an urgent wake-up call to realise that we are sick. We're lying in a hospital bed. If we carry on as we are, the Church of England, as we know it and love it, may not exist in a few generations. We've always done it this way. It needs to end. And we need to say, actually, how can we reimagine, re-envision and surrender control, take our hands off the wheel and see what the next generation want to bring to the table? I think, for me, we need to move, I would describe it, from Church 1.0 to Church 2.0. So, Web 1.0, you're probably familiar with that. It was the birth of the internet. It was the web page that you looked at that didn't do anything. You sat there, you kind of, read it, you put it away. Web 2.0 is the interactivity that's become the norm today. Twitter, Facebook, social media. Everywhere we go online, we don't just absorb things, we shape the environment. But what we need to do is give power to the younger people now. We need to enable them to shape a church they will actually want to carry into the future. Otherwise, there's no way they're going to pick it up when we hand it over to them. But I think when we look to Jesus, who has to be our ultimate role model for the vision of the church, that's what we see. We see somebody who was radical, who was outside the box, who annoyed the religious establishment and got killed as a result. So I think we need some of that radicalisation back into the church to remember this man, this God-man Jesus who shook up history and realise that actually we've become very set in our ways, whether it's in a service, whether it's General Synod. I think we need to put everything on the table and say everything's up for grabs because we are in a state of emergency. From our hospital bed, we can replan our life, dream up something amazing, and then dare to let younger people live it out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Our third speaker this evening is the Reverend Canon Rosie Harper, who's chaplain to the Bishop of Buckingham, but also a General Synod member, and again also a writer and author and speaker. Rosie, you're welcome.
What does the Church of England offer the next generation? Well, I'm no mystic Meg, but any frank look will reveal that without some considerable changes, the future looks very bleak. In terms of the C of E's place in the nation, I think it will be death by 1,000 cuts. The number of bishops in the House of Lords will diminish, not necessarily a bad thing. And it is difficult to calculate the effect of the death of the Queen on people's vaguely benign goodwill towards the good old C of E. But all this is incidental to the most difficult thing to name. In the context of global agony at the effect of bad religion, the C of E has simply lost the trust of the nation as leaders in the spiritual and ethical values of our society. As a church which will not sign up to equalities legislation and scorns some aspects of human right, it has moved in the opposite direction from the changes that society sees as fundamental ethical reforms. OK, they were bemused by the struggles we had to allow women to become bishops. But I tell you, they are repelled by the way we claim to have God's authority to treat LGBTI people not only with discrimination but with downright cruelty. You see, the sort of God you believe in will be mirrored in the sort of institution you run. Believe in a big daddy God and what you will have will be hierarchical and secretive and over-clericalised. Now say we believed in a God who invites us to participate in the dance of creation, whose script for justice was not punishment but equity, and whose song was freedom. How very different the church would be. What we should be offering the next generation is a church whose life bears witness in an embodied way to the authenticity of our message. Then it might be true, and we can talk about the life and the hope and the love of the church once again. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Rosie. Our fourth and final speaker this evening is Christina Rees. Christina is a member of the General Synod, a broadcaster and writer, and also one of the key founders of Watch.
So I'm going to allow myself a little bit of a fantasy. The year, fast forward to this future that we've all been discussing or hearing about, is 2035. And Archbishop Hannah has, in the first 5 years of her term, has made significant and radical changes with the agreement of the synods. She has challenged the status quo that says things have to be the way they are because they've always been that way. And out of the 13,000 parishes that exist, they have been amalgamated, and I'm afraid of the 16,000 church buildings, some of which, quite frankly, are not fit for purpose anymore. Many of those have now been used for other purposes, some the church still is involved with, but it's the great cathedrals and the larger churches who are now the hubs where there is the ministry, the education, the teaching, and the more formal worship. And the rest of the congregations now meet in one another's homes. So it's now cathedrals and kitchens. Also, there has been outreach to other faiths, and people of other faiths and people of good faith, have actually ascribed to a common creed. And this is a bulwark against the extremists. And we're finally taking the laity seriously. And the teaching and education is for the lay people. They're on the front line. Young people are involved, and deaneries are clustered around secondary schools, so that secondary schools and primary schools are now the focus, and every deanery has a youth worker. But the final thing is relationship, because the one thing we always need is relationships. Thank you.
I'm very struck, I think, by the themes of justice, of urgency, of openness, of transparency, of the need to lead with equality, that these things are needed not just in the next generation, but here and now. This is a present moment. And that we might, in fact, be at an interesting tipping point.
We clearly are at a moment of tipping. Simply, thank goodness, at last we've got the prospect of women bishops. The leadership of the Church is not going to be stuck in its anachronistic male character, and let it also be said, public school character. Now we've got a chance of hearing other voices, and that is going to change things remarkably. I really cannot emphasize that too much. We're going to see a different sort of bishop.
We've got to find some way of reconnecting people's real sense of passion and spirituality about their lives with what we have as very formal religion at the moment. I'm not sure how to do it, because it's a matter of asking the next generation how they want to reconnect rather than telling them.
Also, we need a new vision of what is it to be a member of the Church of England? What is it to be Anglican in this country? Because if it looks only like this, we're in trouble, because we actually cannot keep this going on in the way we have.
Now, one of the running themes in these 5 debates we've had now, for the 5th being including this, has been this sense which comes out of some of the research that Professor Woodhead has undertaken and commissioned, is the sense of the leadership of the Church of England now being rather, as it were, to the right and conservative, with the laity really being to the left and rather more progressive.
And of course it is a generational thing, that there is an extraordinary generation gap on the subject of which I was speaking, sexuality. Anyone under 30 just can't see what the issue is. And what's remarkable about that is that it spreads right across traditional churchmanship, that young evangelicals can't see the point of what the conservative evangelical leadership is telling them.
For better or worse, I think I've come to represent something of the split within the conservative evangelical wing when it comes to sexuality. You can Google my story if you're interested and you haven't heard it before, but I've found myself suddenly thrown out somewhat of my evangelical home after coming out as gay this summer in the Independent newspaper. It's been interesting to have conversations with church leaders off the record, where they tell me that they do agree with me, but that they couldn't possibly say that to their congregations because people would leave, that they would stop giving.
If that's what the vicar thinks, that's what the vicar must say. And then his or her congregation can say, "What? You think that?" And
discuss it or say, my goodness, I was holding back because I didn't think you would agree with it. And I think once we start being honest with one another and treating each other like adults, we might actually agree that there's more commonality than we fear there is.
We've been discussing in church on Sunday concepts of peace, as most of us will be doing in Advent. And there's a strong feeling that people are anxious about the way the world is, more than they have been for a long, long time, probably more than they have been since the nuclear threat, since the end of the war. There's a high anxiety level, and a lot of that is focused simply on the word religion, and people genuinely feeling the world would be a better place if it weren't for blooming religion.
We've just been texting our teenage daughters on this row to see what words they would have. And my daughter, who was confirmed last Sunday by a not spineless bishop, said that her key words would be flexibility, beauty, justice, inclusivity. And she also said to me on the phone just outside that she is fed up of being considered homophobic because she goes to church. We have to understand that people watch the church, make assumptions about the church. We are a fact that is observed, and we are observed as the body of Christ.
People that are growing up now have a huge passion for social change, and we really need to make that a massive priority if we want to capture their hearts, because many of the younger generation see in Jesus a radical social change activist, and they don't see that modelled in their congregations. So the parish system enables each parish to have a hub from which Christians can actually get together, combine resources, come up with ideas, and then go out into the local streets and make a difference.
What is good about the Church of England? Is there any reason for it to continue?
I go to a coffee morning with a lot of elderly people every Wednesday morning, and we sit and we have the most frank talks about death and how they'd like to die and whether they'd like to have some say in how it happens and so on. But so often it comes up, I just don't know how I'd cope if I didn't have my faith. Now, that was a faith that was given to them as young children, and they went through all sorts of phases of sometimes being with it, sometimes not going to the church for years and years and years, but something had been laid down in their hearts which gave them strength and hope to be able to cope with the really difficult things that they now have to face. So we've got a huge amount to offer, and woe betide us if we sell ourselves short by fighting amongst each other and actually acting out the violence instead of absorbing it.
Now, what is the greatest success story of the current Church of England? An unequivocal success story. The cathedrals. Their numbers of attendance have gone up 30% in the last 10 years. Their numbers at midweek services have doubled in the last few years. And that is because what they offer. They offer us a sense of continuity. They offer us a sense of the unparalleled liturgy of Cranmer and his successors in creating a prayer book which remains an objective way of us selfish, atomized individuals gathering together in the presence of God as our ancestors and those who are not our ancestors but are part of that tradition once did. The cathedrals are one of the great things we must treasure and develop.
Well, we want a church for all comers, a church for the semi-committed and the lukewarm and the half-hearted, which is probably why cathedrals have succeeded. Good religion for the lukewarm. Now, how are we going to fund that? Well, one obvious way, and my vision in many ways depends upon money, one obvious way is to have a national membership scheme like the National Trust. It costs, for me and my wife, it doesn't matter actually whether we're in a committed relationship or not, but if we live at the same address, we pay £98 per year for membership of the National Trust. And you don't have to do anything whatsoever.
So, I'm Laura, Rabbi Jana Klausner. I'm the senior rabbi to Reform Judaism. I'm just a rabbi. I'm just a teacher with no claim to any special relationship to God. And when people ask me to pray on their behalf or to ask God, my job is to do the opposite. And I think in today's attitudes to authority, something very jolting happens because people are autonomous and may not be going to their clergy for relationship with God. And in fact, it sets up a very dangerous, I think, projection of people's needs or pains or desires.
The most effective clergy that we have in the Archdeaconry where I work are people who get communities together, who take the people outside the church just as seriously as the people inside the church. So I love this idea of lukewarm Christians, because they're much, much more, a much stronger effect on the tone of the entire country than the real keenies who spend their entire focus looking at the internal workings of the church.
Good evening. My name's Hilary Topp. I'm the National Coordinator of the Student Christian Movement. Half of young people go to university, but they are overlooked by the churches, including the Church of England. There's real passion and energy and leadership in the student population and the students that I work with. There's real vision for the future of the church, and we do need to hand over the power to those students who are going to be the future leaders, or who perhaps already are the leaders of our church and of our society.
I'm actually from the church in Wales, which is still Anglican, believe it or not. But I would like to, thinking of the church in Wales, return to the question of what God do Anglicans worship, and try to address it in the context of my own church, which is rife with cronyism and misogyny, and very closed in on itself. I asked myself, and this week I was talking to some students in the university chaplaincy where I was formerly chaplain, this very question: what God do they think Anglicans worship? And they are really at quite a loss, because they take it as a given that the attitudes to women and to gays in our church are simply wrong and evil. That leads me on to say that I think our bishops fail their clergy, certainly in the Church in Wales, and I don't suppose there's any reason to suppose that the Church of England is a great deal different. They fail us because they do not shepherd us in the way we are asked to shepherd our people, their people, God's people.
So question, do you think unity is an objective, an idol, or is it something we experience? And how do we free our clergy up to do what they desperately want?
I couldn't agree more. We have made a fetish of church unity. The church has never been united. Never. From the start. It's got a myth of a Catholic unity. It's never had it. So let us not get sucked into trying to please people with whom we will never agree.
One of the reasons why I'm glad to be an Anglican is the breadth. We don't all have to follow a party line. That's good news. That's really, really energizing and really healthy. But we do need to be more honest.
When I think about the future of the Church of England in a diverse way, I get very excited, because I think we all bring so much to the table, and if we can just have this adult honesty of being able to air our different thoughts, to speak about both our faith and our doubts, our questions, the way we see God differently, I think that diversity under the umbrella of unity is actually the beauty that the broad Church of England offers. And so I did want, as my final thoughts in this debate, to just let you know how excited I am about the future of the church, because I think God is up to something.
We seem to have been talking about the church as if it were in some special bubble. But of course the C of E is an institution. And if you look at institutions across the nation, institutions are not doing great. And young people don't want to join institutions. So the invitation to come and be like us and be part of us is never going to work for the next generation. We're going to have to reimagine what it is to belong to something, because it was right at the beginning, it makes a difference whether you're there or not, and your presence can influence the way in which it evolves. I think that's absolutely crucial.
Well, there'll be an opportunity to thank our speakers more formally at the close of proceedings, but I'm now going to invite the Rt Hon Charles Clarke just to say a few closing remarks before I bring things formally to a close.
What are the two things which are most important? The first is to assert and to reassert the importance of religion in our national life. There are a large number of forces which seek to deny that religion is important in our national lives, and to play a very active role in the public sphere at suggesting that rationality, that science, somehow means that religion has no part to play in lives. I think these views are completely wrong, but we should not underestimate the power of the force which exists in this way. But then the second question, the role of the Church of England. It's different to all the other churches. From the very beginning, the panel emphasised the established nature of the church. But the church has to earn its status if it's going to be an established religion. There's, of course, an argument to be had about whether it should be or not. But if it is to play that particular role, it has to earn that status. It has to demonstrate the way in which society operates, its role in society, its contribution, its values, its ethics. And that brings me back again to the absolutely central point. It is essential not to believe that the church as is or as was is the right place to start. You have to look at the future and what the church needs to be in relation to the wider society. And that is a massive challenge, I acknowledge. But if it is not met, then we really will be at a tipping point and the church will be in steady decline. I don't think that needs to be the case, but I think it requires the kind of vision which everybody's shown here this evening for it not to be the case.